Hello. To everyone listening from the DLSU Research Congress, we thank you for your time and for taking interest in our research, which was motivated by the idea of Dr. Teresa Tuliao Jr. that the government grants an incentive to uncles and aunts who sponsor the education of their relatives. Findings in the recent program for international student assessment showed that test takers in the Philippines ranked among the lowest in key competencies usually learned in primary education. This motivated the scope for this incentive. However, the means by which this incentive can be granted is limited to the taxation laws of the government. The recent train law, for example, removed room for personal exemption in favor of a general policy that would cater to all. But we discovered that the real property tax, a local government tax, has a portion specifically dedicated to education, making this a potential source of funding, implying that the incentive would come in the form of a tax credit, an incentive that's granted by the government to reduce the tax burden of individuals to reward or encourage desirable behavior. With that mechanism in mind, we still needed our idea to pass through certain hurdles, both theoretical and practical, for it to be considered viable. Among these hurdles, these three were the most important to clear. First, the tax credit has to elicit the desired behavior it was made for. Second, it should not cause any unwanted negative behavior. If this can't be avoided, something must at the very least contain it. Lastly, it should not be burdensome to the government considering both the finances and the processes. To deal with this, our group authored a tax credit bill already in a format that lawmakers are used to. Its key features include 1. That it will be funded by the local real property tax, 2. That the tax credit will either be a lump sum amount or a proportional amount, and 3. That it is a tax credit for basic education.
Next, for our design and methods, the question would come, how can our group produce an evidence-based argument to a policy that currently does not yet exist? We would then have to generate our own dataset, but it's not just any random survey given out to just anyone. The respondent must meet the appropriate characteristics of a potential sponsor. Our 210 respondents came from our social networks, who received an online survey, but whose items randomly assigned them into one of two treatments, with the rest for a control group. Treatment A presented the tax credit in proportions, and Treatment B presented it as a lump sum or fixed credit. Respondents in the control group were not presented with incentives, but were simply asked whether they would be willing to sponsor a relative. This established Baseline Willingness to Sponsor, or WTS. For our method, contingent valuation method is a way to elicit information regarding WTS among respondents. We do so by computing the weighted average of WTS for each group of the respondents. Since the responses were submitted as ranges, we set an arbitrary value of 1 to differentiate between ranges and allow conversion into point peso values. Mean WTS was then obtained using the formula. In order to exploit the potential of a survey experiment, we decided to test not only their WTS, but also to see which design aspect would elicit higher WTS. This simple tax credit design can be used to extract as much information as possible using the minimum questions required.
Moving on to the results of our study, the following are the key findings. Firstly, for our baseline, the mean WTS was 13,714.53 pesos per year, where 66% of the group were willing to sponsor at least 30,000 pesos per year. For those in the proportional treatment, the mean WTS was 23,786 pesos, this time with 69% of the sample willing to sponsor at least 30,000 pesos per year. Finally, for a tax credit as a lump sum, it yielded an average WTS of 23,571.81 pesos, with 71% of the group willing to sponsor at least 30,000 pesos annually. Given these results, we performed next some t-tests comparing two independent sample means. We found two key observations. One is that there is a statistically significant 73% increase for proportional and 72% increase for lump sum. The other observation is that there is no statistical significance for the difference between the willingness seen from the two kinds of tax credit. In addition, we also take note that the random assignment of survey items kept selection bias to a minimum, which strengthens the suggested impact of real property tax credits. In conclusion, we see how this tax credit design could work within the fiscal parameters of today's time. Moreover, aside from the tax credit being economically viable, the results of our study also show that there were no perverse effects when monetary incentives were introduced to encourage sponsorship. Lastly, the tax credit we designed is flexible, so whether it is a proportional or lump sum incentive, willingness to sponsor can increase by about 10,000 pesos per year. So that wraps up our presentation. We hope you were able to convey all the salient points of our study, even with a limited amount of time. Thank you for listening and please keep safe.